Imagine Europe in the 11th, 12th centuries. The continent was still recovering from the Great Migration of peoples. Feudal states were beginning to take shape, and monasteries remained the main centers of knowledge. Books were rare, almost sacred. Writing a book meant years of human labor. The primary material was parchment processed animal skins from sheep or goats. Creating a single Bible could require the skins of an entire flock. Information was as costly as the medium it was written on. And then, something arrived that would forever change European history paper. To understand how paper became a European breakthrough, we must first remember that Europe was not the first. The earliest records of paper-making trace back to China in the early 2nd century CE. Chinese tradition credits the invention of paper to an official named Cai Lun, around 105 CE during the Han Dynasty. According to legend, he devised a way to use mulberry fibers, bark, old rags, and fishing nets, mashing them into sheets on a sieve. Archaeologists have found even earlier paper, but Cai Lun systematized the process, making it reproducible and organized. In China, paper was more than a material. It became central to governance, literature, education, and religion. Around 300–400 years later, the technology began slowly moving west, not directly, but through trade and cultural exchange. The next key step occurred in the 8th century. In 751, the famous Battle of Talas took place, where Arab forces of the Abbasid Caliphate clashed with the Chinese Tang army. According to Arab chronicles, Chinese craftsmen familiar with papermaking were captured. Likely, the transfer of knowledge was gradual and also occurred via merchants, but by the 9th century, paper workshops appeared in Samarkand, in Central Asia. From there, the technology spread to Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo. In the Arab world, paper gained a new significance. It became essential for learning, science, literature, and administration. In Baghdad, during the 9th–10th centuries, paper became the standard for bureaucratic correspondence, archival storage, and translations of classical works. Early paper manufactories employed slaves, artisans, and skilled craftsmen. Paper was made from cotton, linen fibers, and rags. In Damascus, Baghdad, and Fez, paper began to replace papyrus, which had been used since ancient Egypt. Europe encountered paper not directly from China, but via the Arab world. However, it was initially considered an exotic curiosity. Europe relied mainly on parchment, which was expensive and durable. Even when Europeans learned of paper, it was seen as suitable for drafts rather than important documents. Over time, however, contact with the Muslim world increased. A key bridge was Sicily and the Iberian Peninsula. In the 8th century, Arabs conquered most of modern Spain and Portugal. This region, known as Al-Andalus, became home to Europe's first paper workshops. Cities like Toledo, Cordoba, and Granada saw paper introduced to European lands. By the 10th century, Cordoba had a thriving book culture. Under Caliph al-Hakam II, 961–976, his library held hundreds of thousands of volumes, many of them on paper. Christian Europe, however, lagged behind. Paper from Al-Andalus reached monasteries in France, Italy, and Germany, but was still treated with caution. Slowly but surely, the process continued. By the 11th–12th centuries, Italian cities such as Amalfi and Genoa mention paper in trade records. Most of this paper was produced in Muslim Spain. The next milestone came in the 13th century. In 1238, King James I of Aragon conquered Valencia, where Arabic paper workshops already existed. Christian craftsmen began adopting the techniques. Within a few decades, paper production appeared in Italy. In Fabriano, in the Marche region, around 1276, the first documented paper workshop of Christian Europe was established. This was a turning point. Fabriano didn't just copy Arabic methods, they improved them. Italians introduced watermarks to mark paper origins and developed water-powered hammers to pulp rags. Production increased dramatically. By the 14th century, Fabriano paper was known across Europe. Meanwhile, workshops emerged in France and Germany, but Italy remained a leader. Merchants supplied paper to universities in Bologna and Paris, monasteries, and city guilds. By the 13th–14th centuries, Paper began gradually, but irreversibly replacing parchment in many areas. Why did this happen? Paper solved the central problem of the Middle Ages, the shortage of information carriers. Parchment was durable but expensive. Paper, made from old clothing, linen scraps, and rags, essentially waste material, was dozens of times cheaper. Information could now circulate faster, and knowledge could spread wider. Yet until the 15th century, paper was not dominant. Its adoption was uneven. It appeared in Southern Europe first, Northern Europe later. In England, the first paper mill appeared only at the end of the 15th century. Germany followed in the 14th century, in Nuremberg and Augsburg. France and Spain also developed production centers. During this spread, the use of paper evolved. Universities arose in Bologna, 1088, Paris to 1150, Oxford to 1096, and Salamanca, 1134. With them came a demand for textbooks and lecture notes. Paper became essential. Professors dictated, students wrote. Parchment would have been prohibitively expensive for such volumes. Paper also entered urban life. Merchants, notaries, bankers, and officials began using paper for contracts, invoices, and ledgers. City archives swelled with paper. City councils and guilds needed serious administrative correspondence, and paper made this far more efficient, especially in the Italian city-states, where trade flourished. The real explosion, however, would come in the 15th century with the invention of the printing press. To understand the impact of Gutenberg, we must first see the foundation laid by paper. Part 2. By the mid-15th century, Europe was on the brink of change, although few realized how profound it would be. Paper had already entered universities, merchant offices, and administrative offices. It had become the material of scribes, notaries, and students. Yet everything remained within the limits of manuscript culture. To create a book, one had to copy it by hand sometimes for years. Even though paper made this process cheaper, the real mass dissemination of knowledge had not yet begun. Then came a man whose name would symbolize a new era, Johannes Gutenberg. Born around 1400 inches Mainz, Germany, to a family of craftsmen, he experimented with metalwork, engraving, and mechanics. He combined several ideas: the screw press used for wine and oil, movable metal type, and oil-based ink. He was not the first to dream of faster text reproduction, but his experiments yielded tangible results. Between 1440 and 1450, Gutenberg began creating the first full printing system in Strasbourg and later Mainz. The culmination of his work was the famous 42-line Bible, printed between 1452 and 1455. It was produced mainly on paper. Here we see the decisive role of paper. Printing on parchment would have been prohibitively expensive, making mass production impossible. Paper provided mass availability. The press provided speed. Together, they transformed Europe. After 1455, printing presses spread rapidly. By the 1472, workshops appeared in Italy, France, and the Netherlands. Venice became a major center of printing. In 1469, Johann de Spira opened a press, soon followed by dozens of others. Venice offered not only paper but trade, distribution, and translation networks. By 1500, Europe had around 1,000 printing workshops, producing roughly 30,000 different editions. The total output in the first 50 years of printing the era of incunabula reached 10-20 million copies. These numbers are astonishing considering that a century earlier, fewer than 10,000 books circulated in Europe. Why was paper so crucial? It was ideal for printing. Parchment, though durable, absorbed ink poorly, was heavy, and costly. Paper absorbed ink better, was thinner, lighter, and cheaper. It could be stored in stacks and transported over long distances, forming the foundation of the information explosion. Books became plentiful. Knowledge was no longer the privilege of monasteries or royal chanceries. Universities could print textbooks, lecture notes, dictionaries, and treatises on medicine, philosophy, and law. Students no longer had to painstakingly copy text by hand. The pace of education increased dramatically. Cities changed as well. Ledgers, contracts, and bank records were now kept on paper. Venetian merchants sent letters and invoices across the Mediterranean. Hanseatic cities in northern Germany exchanged written contracts. Royal courts created archives. Paper enabled the development of bureaucracy, not in a negative sense, but as an instrument of governance. Kings, dukes, and merchant guilds could now maintain written laws, decrees, and agreements. The 16th century brought the Reformation, unimaginable without paper. In 1517, Martin Luther published his 95 Theses against indulgences. They would have taken decades to circulate if copied by hand, yet they spread across Germany within months. Pamphlets, tracts, and German translations of the Bible followed. Paper became a weapon of thought. Simultaneously, paper fueled the Renaissance. Humanists like Petrarch, Boccaccio, and Erasmus could now distribute ideas widely, not in a handful of copies, but in hundreds or thousands. Manuscripts were still used, but printed books increasingly dominated. Ancient texts, rediscovered in monastic libraries, came to life. Architects, artists, and philosophers read Plato, Cicero, and Vitruvius, all thanks to paper. Paper influenced language too. It accelerated the formation of national literatures and standardized languages. Before the 15th century, most educated Europeans wrote in Latin, but now France, Italy, Germany, and England began forming written traditions in their vernaculars. Dante's Divine Comedy had been copied by hand, but in the 16th century, Rabelais' works were printed on paper and reached a broad audience. Paper made communication with the masses possible. Paper also transformed medieval bureaucracy. Scrolls gave way to notebooks, ledgers, and bound books. Archives grew, creating a reliable record of events, decisions, and ideas. Kings, princes, and city governments could now store thousands of documents, building institutional memory rather than relying on oral transmission or single manuscripts. By the end of the 15th century, paper had become as commonplace in educated European life as the internet is today. Shops sold stacks of paper, ink, and pens. Italian, French, and German papermaking families created dynasties, crafting paper using improved Fabriano-inspired techniques. Yet not everything was smooth. Parchment remained in use, particularly in monasteries that distrusted the durability of paper. Important legal documents, royal charters, and church decrees continued to be written on parchment. But gradually, paper advanced into almost every domain of worldly life. The proliferation of books increased literacy. Until the 15th century, reading and writing were privileges of clergy, select citizens, and officials. Now burghers, notaries, judges, and merchants taught their children to read and write. Universities experienced a surge in student numbers. Wealthy women also gained access to books. Writing became a cultural norm. Information ceased being the property of the few. Previously, knowledge could disappear with a single person. Now, it survived in books that could be reproduced. Paper fundamentally transformed European memory, preserving ideas, knowledge, and culture for the generations to come. Part 3. By the 15th, 16th centuries, paper's role in Europe had long ceased to be purely practical. It had become a driving force of civilization, laying the foundation for social, scientific, and cultural transformations. Let's begin with science. Before the 15th century, scientific works existed only in rare manuscripts. Texts by Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy were copied by hand, often with errors. The invention of paper and the printing press allowed knowledge to be standardized and disseminated quickly. By the 16th century, Europe saw the first scientific journals and treatises produced in dozens or hundreds of copies. Figures such as Nicolaus Copernicus, Galileo Galilei, and Isaac Newton relied on paper to publish their ideas. Without affordable paper, the scientific revolution of the 16th-17th centuries would have been unimaginable. Paper also transformed politics. States could record laws, decrees, correspondence, taxes, and trade. French kings created centralized archives. English monarchs maintained tax registers. German princes documented agreements with city-states. Paper enabled the development of bureaucratic states, allowing rulers to govern vast territories without constant personal oversight. In essence, paper became a tool for creating structured government institutions rather than merely representing the power of a ruler. Social consequences were immense. Cheap paper drove literacy growth. Schools and universities printed textbooks, making them accessible. Merchants educated their children in reading, writing, and arithmetic. Citizens read pamphlets, newsletters, and tracts, sparking public debate that was previously impossible. What once circulated slowly in limited circles could now reach thousands simultaneously. Paper's impact on culture was equally profound. The Renaissance, emerging in Italy in the 14th–15th centuries, found its perfect medium in paper. Artists, writers, and philosophers could not only record but also distribute ideas widely. Printing workshops produced tens or hundreds of copies that reached cities across Europe. Humanists like Petrarch, Boccaccio, and Erasmus disseminated their ideas widely, amplifying their influence far beyond manuscript circulation. Religion, too, benefited. The Protestant Reformation, which radically altered Europe's religious landscape, relied on paper. Pamphlets, tracts, and vernacular translations of the Bible reached unprecedented numbers of people. Religion was no longer exclusively mediated by clergy. Paper enabled spiritual texts to reach lay people, empowering personal interpretation and debate. The economy also felt paper's impact. Banks and merchant guilds in Italy, Flanders, and the Hanseatic League used paper for ledgers, contracts, and invoices. Paper reduced errors, sped up record-keeping, and enabled trade networks to expand. In a sense, modern European finance emerged on paper. Paper changed Europe's concept of memory and history. Archives could now store thousands of documents, reflecting not only events but also thoughts, observations, and ideas. Historians of the 16th–17th centuries had access to rich sources. Paper enabled the accumulation of knowledge, the creation of libraries, and the development of public records, laying the groundwork for modern historical science. Paper accelerated cultural integration across Europe. Ideas from Italy, Germany, France, and the Netherlands circulated within months. Artists and thinkers exchanged knowledge. Texts were translated into multiple languages, and Europe became a single cultural space where information moved faster than humans or horses could carry it. In conclusion, paper transformed Europe because it became a universal medium of knowledge and information. It made mass education, scientific development, bureaucracy, trade, and religious and cultural movements possible. Paper prepared Europe for modernity, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and the early modern era. Today, we take paper for granted: books, notebooks, newspapers, documents. Yet in the 14th–16th centuries, paper was revolutionary. It changed how humanity preserves, transmits, and spreads knowledge. From handwritten monastery codices to mass-produced books and archival systems, paper's journey shows that even a simple material can have far-reaching consequences for civilization. Paper is not just a technology, it is a cultural and social catalyst, preparing Europe for the era of discoveries, reforms, revolutions, and progress. From distant China to the Arab world, and finally to European shores, paper reshaped an entire continent.